is a graph you have almost certainly seen. A curve that rises to a sharp peak labeled something like Mount Stupid, then falls off a cliff into a valley of despair, before slowly, painfully climbing back up toward wisdom. It gets shared in arguments. It gets posted in comment sections. It is used to explain why beginners are so loud, so certain, and so completely wrong. It is one of the most famous images in all of popular psychology. And it is fake. That graph does not appear in the original study, not a single version of it. The two scientists who discovered the Dunning-Kruger effect never drew that mountain, never named that valley, and never claimed the thing that graph is used to claim. So what did they actually find? Because the real answer is quieter, stranger, and far more uncomfortable than the cartoon. It suggests that the problem is not simply that some people are incompetent. The problem is that being incompetent may make it nearly impossible to know you are incompetent. That the very skills you would need to recognize your mistakes are the same skills you are missing.
By the end of this video, you'll understand what the experiment really showed, why the version you've been taught is wrong, whether the effect is even real, because a growing number of scientists argue that it isn't, and what all of this means for the one person whose judgment you can never fully trust to evaluate itself. You. Let's begin in 1999. At Cornell University, two psychologists named David Dunning and Dunning-Kruger became interested in a very specific kind of failure. Not ordinary mistakes, confident mistakes. The kind where a person is not just wrong, but is certain they are right, and would be genuinely surprised to learn otherwise. The story goes that part of Dunning's inspiration came from a news report about a man who had robbed two banks in broad daylight, with no mask, no disguise. When the police showed him the security footage, he was baffled. He had rubbed lemon juice on his face. He believed sincerely that because lemon juice can be used as invisible ink, it would make his face invisible to cameras. One man, one voice, from the first word to the last, never changing. A man speaking in his own natural voice, relaxed and clear, unmistakably male. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't insane. He had simply reached a conclusion, and he lacked the knowledge required to see how wrong that conclusion was. His incompetence and his confidence came from the exact same place. Dunning and Kruger wanted to test whether this pattern was universal. So they brought people into a lab and gave them tests in 3 different areas: logical reasoning, English grammar, and, this is real, humor. For the humor test, they had participants rate how funny a set of jokes were, and compared those ratings against the judgments of professional comedians. Then they did the crucial part. After each test, they asked every participant a simple question. How do you think you did, compared to everyone else in this room? Estimate your own rank. Where do you fall? Bottom? Middle? Top? Now they had 2 numbers for every person: how they actually performed and how they believed they performed. And the gap between those 2 numbers is where the entire effect lives. Here's what they found. The people who scored in the bottom 25%, the genuine worst performers, estimated that they were performing better than roughly 2/3 of the room. On some tests, people who scored around the 12th percentile believed they were somewhere around the 62nd. Sit with that for a moment. These were not people who thought they did okay. These were the lowest scorers in the study, and they walked out believing they were above average, comfortably above average.
And it wasn't that they were lying to look good or trying to save face. Dunning and Kruger tested for that, even when there was every reason to be honest, even when accuracy was rewarded. the worst performers still could not see how badly they had done. Dunning's explanation for this is the heart of the whole idea, and it's worth saying slowly because this is the part almost everyone gets wrong. The skills you need to do a task well are usually the same skills you need to judge whether you did it well. Think about grammar. To recognize that a sentence is grammatically broken, you need to understand grammar. But if you don't understand grammar, then the broken sentence looks fine to you.
You lack the tool that would let you see the mistake. And it's the same tool you were missing in the first place. This is what psychologists call metacognition. Thinking about your own thinking. Knowing what you know and sensing the edges of what you don't. And Dunning-Kruger's argument was that incompetence attacks metacognition directly. It doesn't just make you fail. It removes the instrument you would use to detect that you failed. They called this the dual burden. You were hit twice, once by the mistake, and a second time by your inability to notice the mistake. The incompetent are, in their words, unskilled and unaware of it. But here is the part of the study that got left out of the memes. And in some ways, it's the more interesting half, because the effect runs in both directions. The top performers, the people who actually scored the highest, did something almost opposite. They underestimated themselves. The best scorers assumed they were more ordinary than they really were. They thought the tasks were fairly easy, and so they assumed that everyone else must have found them easy too. They were wrong for the mirror image reason. Where the worst performers couldn't imagine how much they didn't know, the best performers couldn't imagine that other people found this hard. Psychologists call this the false consensus effect. When something comes easily to you, you quietly assume it comes easily to everyone. So the real picture is not a mountain and a valley. It's a strange convergence. The least skilled think they're better than they are. The most skilled think they're more average than they are. And so both groups drift toward a false middle, everyone clustering around pretty good, while the actual range of ability underneath is enormous. Which means the confident beginner and the doubtful expert are, in a sense, making the same error. Both have lost the ability to see where they truly stand. They've just lost it in opposite directions. Now, if you've been paying attention, you might already sense a problem forming. Because I told you at the start that the famous graph is fake, and that some scientists doubt the whole effect. So let's deal with both of those. Starting with the graph, because that one is genuinely embarrassing for how confidently it gets shared. Picture that curve again, the one that shoots up to a tall peak, crashes down into despair, and then rises gently toward mastery. Go and read the original 1999 paper. It's public. It's called Unskilled and Unaware of It. And you will not find that graph anywhere in it. The real charts in the study are far less dramatic. They mostly show two lines, your actual performance and your perceived performance, both climbing from the low scores up to the high scores. The key feature is simply that the gap between the lines is widest at the bottom and narrows toward the top. There is no towering peak. There is no cliff. There is no valley. So, where did the mountain come from? It appears to have been stitched together later, out on the internet, by blending the Dunning-Kruger name with two completely different concepts. One is an old business idea called the 4 stages of competence. The other is something called the Gartner hype cycle, a marketing curve about how people get overexcited about new technology and then get disillusioned. Somebody, somewhere, fused these shapes together, slapped Dunning-Kruger on top, added the words Mount Stupid, and it spread because it was funny, and it felt true. And that is the irony that should make all of us a little uneasy. The single most popular illustration of people confidently spreading a claim they don't actually understand is itself a claim that millions of confident people spread without understanding it. The graph is a live demonstration of the very thing it pretends to explain. But an inaccurate graph doesn't tell us whether the underlying effect is real. And that is where the story takes its sharpest turn.
Over the last several years, a serious challenge to Dunning-Kruger has emerged, and it doesn't come from people who feel personally insulted by the idea. It comes from statisticians, and their objection is subtle, so let me walk you through it carefully, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. The critics argue that a chart which looks exactly like the Dunning-Kruger effect can be produced from pure random noise, from data with no psychological meaning in it at all. Here's the intuition. Imagine you ask a large group of people to guess their own rank on some task. Most people, for all sorts of reasons, will guess somewhere near the middle. Very few will confidently declare themselves the single worst person in the room, or the absolute best. Now, imagine everyone's actual scores are, say, partly a matter of luck. When you then line people up from worst to best and compare their guesses to their real scores, something automatic happens. The people who genuinely scored at the bottom will on average have guessed higher than they scored because they guessed toward the middle. And the people who scored at the top will on average have guessed lower than they scored because they also guessed toward the middle. That is the exact pattern Dunning and Kruger reported. Bottom overrates, top underrates. Except in this version, nobody's metacognition is broken. It falls out of the mathematics on its own. It's a statistical mirage created by comparing a noisy measurement against itself. When researchers ran this test, feeding random, meaningless numbers into the same analysis Dunning and Kruger used, they got a beautiful Dunning-Kruger-shaped result out of data that contained no real effect whatsoever. So for a while, it looked like the whole thing might collapse. One of the most famous findings in psychology, possibly an illusion made of arithmetic. But that isn't quite where the science has landed either. And this is where you have to resist the temptation to swing to the opposite extreme, because the popular version is exaggerated is not the same as none of it is true. When researchers went back and used more careful methods, techniques specifically designed to strip out that statistical mirage and isolate any genuine signal underneath, several of them still found something left over, a smaller effect, a real one, evidence that the least skilled people are in fact worse at judging their own ability than better performers are, beyond what the noise alone can explain. So the honest summary, the one that survives all of this, sounds like this. The cartoon is wrong. There is no Mount Stupid, no dramatic crash, no tidy emotional journey from arrogance to wisdom. A large part of what people call Dunning-Kruger is just ordinary human overconfidence, plus a statistical trick of the data. But underneath the exaggeration, a real and quieter effect appears to remain. People who lack skill in something do tend to have a weaker sense of how much they lack it, precisely because understanding the subject and judging your grasp of it draw on the same well. And notably, this seems to fade with expertise. As you actually get good at something, your ability to accurately assess yourself tends to sharpen too. Which brings us back to the beginning. To you. Here is the thought I want to leave you with. And it's a genuinely difficult one, so I'm not going to dress it up. You cannot personally feel your own incompetence. That is the whole trap. Incompetence doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with a warning light or an uneasy feeling in your stomach. In the areas where you know the least, your confidence and your ability have quietly become disconnected. And from the inside,
being confidently wrong feels precisely, exactly the same as being right. There is no internal signal that separates them. If there were, the effect could not exist. So you can't wait to feel it. The feeling never arrives.
What you can do is smaller and harder, and it's really the only tool available. You can build the habit of asking, in the moments when you feel most certain, one deliberately annoying question. How would I actually know if I were wrong about this? And then go looking. Not for the people who agree with you, but for the ones who can see the mistakes you can't. Because the least skilled being the most confident was never really a story about other people. It was never about the loud beginner or the man with lemon juice on his face. It's a description of a blind spot that every single human mind is built with, including the one listening to this sentence right now. The only real question is whether you're humble enough to keep checking the mirror, even when you're sure there's nothing there to see.